The lights inside the ICU flicker like dying stars. Phones buzz unanswered. Tears fall silently onto cold hospital floors. And in the middle of it all, King Harris, once the unstoppable prince of hip-hop royalty, now fighting for every breath. The doctors are whispering words no fan ever wanted to hear. The family is gathered, clinging to hope as the final report is prepared. And the world. The world is holding its breath. How did we get here? From scandal and spotlight to silence and heartbreak. This isn't just a story about life and death. It's a story about legacy, betrayal, and the moment when fame means nothing in the face of fate. Buckle up, because this is King Harris' most haunting chapter yet. And it might be his last dot. The fluorescent lights above the ICU hummed softly, a cruel contrast to the chaos unfolding beneath them. Nurses whispered urgently. Monitors beeped in irregular rhythms. The air smelled sterile, but it felt heavy, suffocating, as if grief itself had seeped into the walls. And at the center of it all lay King Harris, motionless, fragile, and far removed from the fiery storm of fame that had once defined him for years. King had been untouchable, the heir to a hip-hop empire, the son of industry royalty, the prince of controversy. His name dominated headlines, his antics broke the internet, and his defiance of expectations made him both loved and loathed. But now, stripped of the glitz and bravado, he was just a young man on a hospital bed, his chest rising and falling against the ticking clock of fate. Outside those ICU doors, the Harris family was unraveling. T.I., usually the picture of composure, paced the hallway like a man running from time. Tiny sat silently on a bench, her hands trembling as she scrolled through messages of support and speculation. Siblings huddled in corners, some praying, some crying, all clinging to the fragile hope that the next update from behind those doors wouldn't be the last. It hadn't always been this way. King had been the firebrand of the family, the rebel who refused to live in anyone's shadow. From viral rants on Instagram Live to explosive altercations caught on camera, he had built a reputation as a force too wild to control. Every scandal seemed to fuel his fame. Every misstep only made him more magnetic to an audience addicted to chaos. But behind the headlines, something darker was brewing. Whispers of health problems had surfaced months before, dismissed as rumors or clout-chasing exaggerations. Fans laughed it off. Critics mocked him. And King, ever the provocateur, fueled the flames with cryptic posts. "Y'all want me gone so bad, huh?" He once tweeted, "Careful what you wish for." Now those words echoed like a prophecy. According to insiders, the Harris family had known more than they let on. King's hospital visits weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a growing pattern. Collapses, fatigue, episodes that left even his closest friends deeply concerned. Yet the family, determined to protect the brand, had kept everything quiet. They wanted the image of strength, not the reality of fragility behind the curtain of celebrity. The cracks had already begun to show. The pressure was relentless. Endorsements, performances, public appearances, the demands of stardom never ceased. And King, barely out of his teens, bore the weight of an empire built long before he could understand its cost. Every meltdown was dismissed as immaturity. Every breakdown was spun as drama. But the truth was far more devastating. King was crumbling under the expectations that came with his last name. The breaking point came one night during a high-profile performance. Midway through his set, King stopped singing. He stared out into the sea of lights and faces, fans chanting his name, cameras flashing, and then, without a word, he walked off stage. The crowd thought it was a stunt. The headlines called it unprofessional. But backstage, the reality was heartbreaking. King collapsed in tears, screaming, "I can't do this anymore." That was the moment the Harris empire should have paused, but it didn't. The show went on. The brand came first. And King's silent cries for help faded into the background noise of fame. Now, as machines beeped rhythmically beside his hospital bed, those decisions loomed larger than ever. Reports leaked from the hospital hinted at stress-induced organ failure, Others suggested dangerous self-medication. It's a desperate attempt to keep up with a lifestyle that demanded too much from too young a soul. Pills, energy boosters, substances meant to fuel his highs, but quietly eroding his body from the inside out. And the question that haunted everyone was simple yet impossible. Did King Harris do this to himself? Or did the industry do it to him? Social media became a battlefield. Hashtags like #PrayForKing and #FinalGoodbye trended worldwide. Fans posted tear-soaked videos holding up photos from concerts and meet and greets. Old clips of King laughing, rapping, living were reshared millions of times. Others were far less sympathetic. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. One viral tweet read, "King lived too fast. Now he's paying the price." But amidst the noise and chaos, one fact remained no one truly knew. What was happening behind those hospital walls? Some insiders claimed that doctors were preparing the family for the worst. Words like irreversible and non-responsive began circulating. Others speculated about a final report, a document that could outline King's prognosis, or even a decision about life-sustaining measures. It was a possibility no one wanted to speak aloud, but everyone feared that the son born into hip-hop royalty might be facing his final curtain call. Inside the ICU, silence was suffocating. Even the usual chatter of nurses was replaced by a solemn stillness. Every breath King took was measured, every movement monitored, every whisper from the medical team loaded with meaning. The family gathered close, barely spoke. There was nothing left to say. Tiny wiped tears from her face as she held King's hand, whispering prayers under her breath. T.I. stared blankly at the monitors, the weight of fatherhood pressing down like never before. Around them, siblings tried to hold on to hope, to faith, to anything, but the reality was inescapable. The boy who once seemed invincible was now as fragile as glass, and outside the world kept spinning. News outlets updated their stories by the minute. Paparazzi camped outside the hospital. Fans lit candles and held vigils. The world that had watched King Harris rise to fame now held its breath as it watched him teeter on the edge of a tragic farewell. This wasn't just a medical crisis anymore. It was a reckoning. A reckoning for a family that had built an empire on power and perfection. A reckoning for an industry that glorified excess and ignored warning signs. And most of all, a reckoning for King himself. The young man who had once felt untouchable but was now confronting the most human of all battles. The fight for life. As the night dragged on and the whispers from the doctors grew quieter, one phrase began to echo through the halls. A phrase no one was ready to face. Final report. Was this truly the end? Or was there still a chance, however small, that King Harris' story was not finished yet? The news of King Harris's condition didn't just shake Atlanta. It sent shockwaves around the world. Every blog, every talk show, every social media feed was saturated with updates, speculation, and theories. What had once been just another celebrity headline had transformed into a full-blown crisis. And at the center of it all was a 19-year-old boy whose life was hanging by a thread. Inside the hospital, the tension was unbearable. Doctors moved in and out of King's room in silence, their faces carefully neutral, revealing nothing. But behind closed doors, the whispers didn't stop there. As reporters dug deeper, disturbing details began to surface about the intense pressure King had been under. For years, he had lived in the shadow of his father's legacy, expected to carry the Harris name with the same dominance, charisma, and influence. But King was never just his father's son. He wanted to carve out his own path, and that hunger for individuality often clashed with the expectations placed on him. Friends described a young man at war with himself, desperate to prove he was more than a celebrity kid, yet struggling to cope with the weight of the spotlight. One former associate recalled a haunting conversation weeks before King's hospitalization. "He told me he felt trapped," a source said. "Like no matter what he did, it would never be enough. The fame, the money, the attention, it all looked good on the outside, but inside, he was drowning." It's those words, "I'm drowning," echoed across social media as fans began to re-examine King's final posts. One of his last Instagram stories, shared just days before his collapse, read simply, "Y'all think you know me. You don't." At the time, it seemed like typical King bravado. Now it felt like a silent scream. The more people learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the final chapter in a story of unchecked fame, ignored warning signs, and crushing pressure. And at the heart of it all was a question that no one could answer. Was King Harris a victim of his own choices, or was he a casualty of a system that demanded too much from him too soon? Meanwhile, inside the hospital, emotions ran high. T.I. was seen leaving a closed-door meeting with doctors, his usually stoic face streaked with tears. Tiny had stopped speaking to the media entirely, choosing instead to remain by her son's side around the clock. And siblings, many of whom had grown up in the same spotlight, took to social media with cryptic messages. "Pray for us," one wrote. "Only God knows the truth." But even as the family tried to keep details private, more secrets were bubbling to the surface. Hospital staffers claimed that King's toxicology report had raised red flags. Rumors swirled of performance-enhancing substances, prescription misuse, and dangerous self-medication, all allegedly taken in an attempt to maintain his energy, his image, and his career. And while fans debated whether those claims were real, a far more explosive theory began circulating that King's condition wasn't just the result of reckless behavior. It was the consequence of deeper, more sinister forces. Some believed that the entertainment industry itself had chewed him up and spit him out. This is what happens when you turn kids into products, one viral tweet read. They're pushed to their breaking point and then abandoned when they break. Others speculated that the Harris family had deliberately hidden the truth to protect their empire. They knew, another user posted. They knew he was falling apart and they let him. The narrative shifted from sympathy to anger. Candlelight vigils outside the hospital were joined by protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for King, and the industry did this." Conspiracy theories flourished. Was this a case of neglect, a cover-up, or something even darker? A deliberate attempt to silence a young man who knew too much? Inside the ICU, none of that mattered. King's condition remained unchanged, stable but critical. Doctors continued to run tests, monitor vitals, and adjust treatments. But behind the curtain of medical terminology, a quiet, devastating truth hung in the air. Time was running out. The phrase "final report" appeared again and again in whispered conversations, a chilling reminder that this story might not have a happy ending. And as the family gathered once more around King's bedside, tears streaming down their faces, the world held its breath. The boy who once commanded stages and set the internet on fire now lay silent, his future uncertain. But one thing was becoming clear. No matter what the outcome, King Harris' story was bigger than one man's fight for life. It was a mirror reflecting the cost of fame, the weight of legacy, and the price of silence. And as the clock ticked past midnight and the hum of machines filled the air, one question echoed louder than any headline. How did it come to this? The sun hadn't risen in days, or at least that's how it felt inside the Harris family's private waiting room. The curtains remained closed. The air hung thick with anxiety and whispered prayers. And as King Harris lay unconscious a few doors down, the walls around his family were beginning to crack under the weight of truth. It started with a leak, small at first, but enough to send the media machine into overdrive. An anonymous source claiming to work inside the hospital posted a cryptic message online. It's not just about his health. There's more. Much more. Within hours, major gossip sites were running with the story. Was King's condition more complicated than the public had been told? Was the Harris family hiding something? The rumors gained momentum when a set of alleged medical records surfaced in a private Discord group. They appeared to show traces of unregulated substances in King's blood, not standard medications, but experimental boosters linked to underground suppliers. The documents were quickly taken down, but not before screenshots spread like wildfire. Suddenly, This wasn't just a story about a young man in critical condition. It was about how he ended up there and who might be responsible. Investigators, journalists, and fans alike began to follow the money trail. King's lavish lifestyle had always raised questions. The high-end cars, the extravagant jewelry, the never-ending parties. Most assumed it was funded by his family's fortune. But new whispers suggested a darker source. According to an alleged insider, King had been working with private financiers, individuals with ties to underground operations in Atlanta. These weren't legitimate investors. They were part of networks known for laundering money, supplying illegal performance enhancers, and funding celebrity lifestyles under the radar. And the most shocking claim? The Harris family might have known. They knew where the money was coming from, the anonymous source wrote. They didn't care. As long as the lifestyle matched the brand, no one asked questions. The implications were explosive. If the reports were true, the Harris empire wasn't just built on fame and music, it was propped up by questionable deals and dangerous decisions. The public was divided. Some accused the media of fabricating stories to capitalize on a family's tragedy. Others believed every word, convinced that the truth was finally bubbling to the surface. Meanwhile, the family's silence spoke volumes. No official statements were released. Lawyers declined interviews. Even King's siblings, usually active on social media, went dark. The silence, once seen as a sign of privacy, now felt like a sign of guilt. Then came the next bombshell. A leaked audio recording allegedly captured the night before. King collapsed. In it, a voice that sounded like King's could be heard in a panicked conversation. "They're setting me up," the voice said. "I'm done with all of this. I'm going to tell the truth." The clip was barely 30 seconds long, but it was enough to ignite a firestorm. What truth was King planning to reveal? Who was they? And did someone have a reason to keep him quiet? Conspiracy theories exploded online. Some claimed King had been preparing to expose industry corruption, illegal deals, financial manipulation, even exploitation of young artists. Others believed he was planning to break free from his family's shadow, threatening to reveal secrets that could dismantle their empire. A darker theory emerged too, that someone close to him had sabotaged his health to ensure he never spoke. It sounded far-fetched until a former family associate added fuel to the fire. "There are people in that circle who would do anything to protect their name," they told a gossip blog. If King was really planning to talk, that would have scared a lot of powerful people. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. What had begun as a medical emergency was now a potential criminal investigation in the making. Activists called for authorities to launch a probe. Fans demanded answers. Hashtags like #Who Silenced King and #Justice for King trended globally. Back at the hospital, the chaos outside began to seep inside. T.I. was seen arguing with lawyers in hushed tones. Tiny reportedly refused to leave King's side, even as news vans crowded the parking lot. And sources claimed that federal investigators had reached out to the hospital for information, a sign that the story was no longer confined to gossip blogs. The family's attempts to control the narrative were failing. Every hour brought new leaks, new accusations, new layers to a story that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. It was no longer just about King's condition. It was about the legacy of one of hip-hop's most powerful families. And as public opinion shifted from sympathy to suspicion, another chilling piece of information surfaced. Doctors had warned the family weeks earlier that King's body was on the verge of collapse. Handwritten notes attached to his file, allegedly leaked by a hospital employee, revealed a series of ignored recommendations: strict rest, psychological evaluation, immediate treatment for early signs of organ stress. None of it was followed. They were warned. As the scandal deepened, a new phrase began to appear in online forums and late-night news segments: the fall of a dynasty. It was sensational, but it captured the mood perfectly. The Harris name, once synonymous with power and influence, now teetered on the edge of ruin. Yet, amid the chaos, one question still loomed larger than all the rest. Was King Harris a victim of his own reckless decisions? or a pawn in a much larger game? Inside the ICU, that question didn't matter. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Nurses checked vitals. The family held on to hope, even as the walls around them closed in. But the whispers outside were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as a story about a young man's fight for life had become something far more sinister. A story about greed, betrayal, and the dark underbelly of fame. And as the words "final report" began to circulate once more, one truth became clear. Whatever was written on those pages would not only determine King's fate, it could rewrite the future of an empire. The Harris family had always been careful with their image. For years, they'd weathered storms, scandals, lawsuits, public feuds, and each time they had managed to protect the brand. But this was different. This was bigger. And now, as King Harris clung to life in a private ICU suite, the walls of that carefully constructed empire were starting to crumble from every direction. The whispers had grown too loud to ignore. What began as online speculation was now the subject of mainstream news segments and investigative reports. Was King Harris a victim of industry exploitation? Read one headline. Did the Harris family ignore medical warnings? Asked another. Every outlet had its angle. But they all agreed on one thing. Something about this story didn't add up. And the pressure wasn't just coming from the media. Behind the scenes, federal agencies were beginning to circle. According to multiple sources, the IRS, DS, and even the FBI had requested financial documents and business records related to the Harris empire. Officially, it was all part of a routine inquiry. But the most damning part came near the end. The report included a section labeled Contributing Factors. In it, the medical team concluded that King's condition was not solely the result of natural causes or bad luck. It was compounded by extreme psychological stress, substance misuse, and, most explosively, external pressures and influences from individuals within his immediate circle. The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Tiny sobbed quietly, burying her face in her hands. T.I. sat motionless, staring straight ahead. One of King's siblings stormed out of the room, unable to listen any longer. The truth was no longer speculation. It was on paper, signed and sealed by medical professionals. And it pointed directly at the people who were supposed to protect him. Within minutes, fragments of the report began leaking online. It was everywhere. Front-page headlines, breaking news alerts, trending hashtags. Harris family blamed in King's collapse. Final report confirms neglect. Dynasty destroyed by secrets. The internet exploded. Fans who had once flooded social media with prayers were now demanding justice. They let him die for the brand. One viral post read, "They ignored every sign because the money mattered more." Another read, "He cried for help, and they silenced him." Protesters outside the hospital grew louder, their chants echoing through the streets. Justice for King. No more lies. Hold them accountable. Within hours, politicians and advocacy groups were calling for investigations into the entertainment industry's treatment of young stars. Some even pushed for new legislation to protect minors and family-managed artists from exploitation. The legal fallout was swift and severe. Attorneys representing King's estate announced plans to file lawsuits against multiple parties, including certain family members, managers, and third-party suppliers. Federal agencies confirmed that preliminary investigations into financial misconduct and potential negligence were underway. Banks froze accounts. Sponsorship deals evaporated overnight. And the once mighty Harris empire began to crumble under the weight of lawsuits, subpoenas, and public outrage. But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment came during a press conference held just 48 hours later. The Harris family, visibly shattered, stood before the world to address the situation for the first time. T.I., usually poised and commanding, struggled to speak. "We made mistakes," he admitted, voice trembling. "We missed signs. We believed he was stronger than he was. And for that, we will never forgive ourselves." Tiny broke down mid-sentence, unable to